Hello and welcome. This is the 11th episode of the Design System Social Club. I'm very happy to have another episode to show you cool stuff. We're going to try new stuff today. I'm pretty excited about that. See if technology will fail us or not. But we're going to demo new tools, for design systems. And with me today, I have Katie. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
Hi, Kitty is a designer in Primer, so for GitHub, but she's also a hybrid. So in like perfect place for you to be and try new tools today. Hi, Kitty. And then we have Donna. Hi, Donna.
Hi there.
Hi, Donna is obviously for I don't know who would not know who you are, but you're a designer at TELUS Digital, and overall, like a speaker. You are also hosting what is it, Design System Toronto, I want to say.
Yeah, at chapter lead for the design systems community.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for being with us. We have also Donny to represent more the end side. He works at GoDaddy and he's a regular now at the Design System Social Club too. We were supposed to have Kelly and he's late, so we'll see when he's gonna start to join us. And then apparently we have Gina. Yes, probably Gina, you are first.
Probably first.
Yeah. And congrats, Gina, on your big announcement today. That's pretty cool. We're all very excited for you. And then, well, I guess she says, "Oh, hi." So, hi. Uh, and here is Kelly. Hey, Kelly, how is it going?
Bonjour.
It's so French of you to be late. What are you doing?
Fashionably late.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, thanks everybody to be there. So today we're gonna try to demo stuff, new tools, especially there's like Specify, Backlight, what Supernova. We want to talk maybe about like a Figma plugin too, but we'll see how much time we have for everything. So before that, I just wanted to give like a disclaimer. We are not sponsored by anybody to do these things. We're just like discovering them together. We're probably not going to do like justice to any of those tools. I have like the biggest respect to people trying to build stuff. So you know what? I'm going to like take it as, like a first look at some of those tools and thinking about maybe what would they be good for, or ask ourselves questions. I think for if the creators of those tools are looking at us, maybe it's more about like first impression on or the journey of like trying to onboard on your tool. So if we don't give them justice, I want to apologize first, and it's probably more about us than about the tool itself. Cool. So I was thinking that we could start by looking at Specify, if that's cool with everybody. But before we do that, and I'm going to show it to you. Look at that! Isn't it beautiful layout? So this is a Figma file that I just scrambled to get something to get started with. So obviously Design System Social Club themed. But I have like vectors and bitmaps, and I have like colors, typography, components, icons, a little bit of everything, so that it makes just to see, like, to have like a starting point of something that would vaguely and very very, very small design system base. Cool. So we have that. It's going to be the same one that I use for different things. But we have this, and now I'm going to try to share I came prepared today. It was very intense. Okay, so let's share that. This is Specify. Oh yeah, Specify? That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know.
No, specify. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Specify. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's like we're not gonna we're gonna get into the GIF or whatever. So I'm gonna continue with Specify today. Anyway, so Specify. What I thought was super interesting from the get-go is when I was looking at the homepage, it doesn't talk much, if at all, about design system. And I actually looked into it, and there's like one occurrence of design system in this entire page, which I thought was interesting for, basically what I would consider a design system tool. But they talk about brand, they talk about, like distributing it and everything, which kind of makes sense. But so distribute your brand from design to code. Cool. And that's basically, I think, what, like a lot of us, and maybe we can start with that from everybody. But the problem that I think all those tools are trying to solve is, how do you actually have some kind of middleware between, Figma or another design tool and code and everything? So Specify is apparently there for that. So, you can basically have sources and destination, and they're in the middle to be like some kind of API. Anybody here on the call like tried it before? Yep. Okay. Just Kelly. Cool. So I will log in, and hopefully we'll see something.
I love it. It's like live streaming.
Literally, this is what we do.
We are
Okay.
live streaming.
It's so much like it actually is.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So basically, like Specify, when you start, I obviously like created something already. So we have a test here. You create like different repository for, I'm guessing, like different brands, because remember that Specify talks about brands, not necessarily system. And so I created this first repo. Cool. And then inside of it, what is interesting is that you're looking already at stuff that I already put there, right? But you need to start by adding sources, which, kind of makes sense. And right now, if you want to add a source, basically, like you have to, tell it if you want to bring design tokens or assets, and then, what kind of token you want to add, and so forth and so on. So let's say I'm just going to do this. It's not going to work, but that's okay, because I don't have any measurement. But I had already linked my Figma file to this Specify app. So that's why you see it already, like choose your app. This is mine. Okay, cool. Another app for more catalog. Well, this is interesting because, as you can see, in terms of sources, right now you only have Figma, and apparently they're planning Google Drive and Dropbox and maybe other stuff. Okay. And while I'm here, maybe I'm going to talk about the destinations, but the same thing. In terms of destination, right now you only have GitHub out of the box, and then they're apparently planning to add Google Drive, Notion, Dropbox, and maybe something else. So, okay. So this is what we have right now. So it's going to be pretty limited for now to Figma and GitHub. Let me just go back to where I was. So in terms of sources, you add a source. I want to add design tokens, let's say measurement, although I don't have any right now. Then you select your Figma file from an existing file, sorry. And then the file that you want to use, the SC test, is the one that I have. You set up your connection. So obviously we see the Figma file that we have, current version. It's interesting because you can basically select different version of your Figma file, then select the path. So this is the page. And after that, I'm selecting either like if I want a particular frame inside of my document, like inside of my file, and then I click, well, I guess I need to choose a frame. It's not going to work again. So I'm just going to try vectors, whatever. And then if you want to synchronize it automatically or not, and then it's going to test our connection, and it's going to fail because I don't think, oh, I have one measurement for whatever reason. Oh yeah, I know why. Cool. So I have a first asset of 239 pixels now, and you will see it here. Okay, we have it just now. Cool. Any questions so far?
Yeah, show us the Figma that has the 239.
Yes, I will. So basically, why is this thing happening? It's because I'm going to try to show it to you here, because this is a vector actually. First asset is this like thing that is vaguely look like a rounded corner rectangle. And basically, well, I, like looking through the different documentation, they actually have like a pretty good Notion page where they talk to you about sources and stuff like that. And what is interesting is that if you're looking at measurements, you're going to see that to collect measurements to specify, you must have created a frame containing your measurement layers, and specify will create measurements based on the name of your layers. So my layer was, like first asset or something like that, and the width of your layer. And so because my rectangle is 239 pixels, it just picked it up and, scrape it and just put it in specify directly. Which brings me to like one of the points that I wanted to make is that basically if you want to use specify, apparently you kind of have to like format your Figma file in a way that specify can scrape. So is it the best way to do this? I don't know. I feel like there's probably like pros and cons about it, but I thought it was interesting. And we can see like later we'll see how other product do it too. But yeah, so basically you have to have like your stuff in Figma pretty much like done correctly. So for colors, for example, you can use Figma styles or literally like a frame measurement. We just watch it. You can have borders too. This is the kind of same thing. They just picked up first asset, and first asset as a border, so it can actually look at it and say, okay, it's 4 pixels solid color. Great. Textiles, where we're able to actually scrap those things too. And you can also upload your font, right? And then in terms of assets, you can bring up vectors and bitmap. Interestingly, if you want to, like at first I was a little bit struggling, because if you want to be able to have, vectors of bitmap into your specify repo, you need to actually in Figma export them as PNG. I mean, for bitmaps, like PNG or JPEG. And for vectors, I think it's SVG or PDF. So that's, like, again, you have to format your Figma file the way they intended for it to work correctly, and being able to import it into your specify repo. Does that make sense? Cool. So that was for sources. And as you see, like I have like all my sources and they're synced, that's great. And then I have destinations. So destination, as we saw, right now is only like GitHub. So the idea, as if you remember the diagram, is that specify will actually be able to populate whatever they scrape from your Figma file into whatever GitHub repo you want. Cool. So that means that obviously you need to link it to your GitHub account and to your GitHub repo. I don't know if it's going to be, yeah, that's mine. Cool. It goes to specify test in my GitHub. You can actually see it there. So one of the things that you need to do to make it work is actually create a config file for specify. And this is kind of like where the magic happens, because this is where you're literally specifying how you want it in your GitHub repo. So, I mean, is it super like designer friendly? Probably not, but I don't think it's I don't think that's supposed to be. So it's actually, like looking at it, it's nothing too complicated, but I feel like, it's a JSON file, so it should be readable for anybody. But at the same time, like understanding what you can or cannot do probably needs somebody that is a little bit more technical. Any question on that particular aspect?
Can you transform values? It looks like there's like a parser.
Exactly.
What can you do?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. So there's some doc online that are, I'm gonna be honest. I was like, this is good for like a first trial, but then after that, you're like, okay, how do I know? For example, like rule of your colors. This rule requires a path to write your SCSS file, a filter to retrieve only design tokens of type color, and one parser, 2 CSS custom properties. Cool, but then it's like, this is cool for like a first example, but then what? So I feel like the best thing is probably to go directly to Specify app GitHub repo and look at the parsers that they have, because if you go there, let's go for example for this one, they actually did a pretty good job at like describing it for every parser. So I feel like a little bit of fresh paint here, where potentially you can document it a little bit better. But I think like you basically have first of all a good list of parser, but also like at least some README documentation in GitHub to understand what you can or cannot do. So I mean, you can look at this, but from camel case to pixel to REM, stuff like that. I didn't go too far, so I don't know exactly like what you can or cannot do. I like the fact that there's SVGO for assets, so there's a way to actually optimize your SVG directly there, so you're not asking designers to actually do this kind of work. I think that's pretty cool. And then I would like, if you're interested to learn more, I would highly encourage to look at this Notion guide. It's, I think, much better than what is online today on their website. But overall, the idea is there. Any question before I jump into the last section?
Can I summarize, I think, what Specify is doing before you go in the last section? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, sure.
Because it sounds like it's like you're taking Figma assets, could be tokens or whatever. You're taking that, you're pulling that into Specify. And Specify is essentially going to be able to send it to GitHub, and in that GitHub or the repo, you can transform what was found in Specify into some other format. Is that the workflow that we're looking at?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. All right. That's all I was trying to wrap my head around. Okay, great.
Yeah. And as you can see, like you can, it's interesting because like everything is kind of like boils down to this particular config file where you can, specify the path and specify, how do you want to sort it? What are you filtering, from your sources, so that, for example, here, I'm just like picking up colors and then parsing them, sorting by the name, and then, obviously like I get the name, and then the value is transformed into CSS custom properties. Okay. One thing that I noticed that I thought was pretty funny is that when you look at so everything, like with my config file, everything is stored in this assets folder. So you can see that like I have my first asset and logo in an SVG format. Like, I mean, doesn't look like much here, but and then you have your variables, and for example, I have my colors. And here's the thing that I thought was interesting is that for whatever reason, when all my colors named are actually capitalized, but for whatever reason, when it's 2 word, it's not anymore. But when it's 1, it still has the capitalized. So I'm like, interesting. So again, feel like it's more like fresh paint than anything. But yeah, that was interesting. So that's all great, but that's kind of like, okay, so I moved everything from Figma to GitHub, but then what? I think that what we're all expecting here is basically this process to be automated, and it is. So if I'm changing, let me just so it's annoying because I cannot just switch from Figma to like sharing my Figma window and the Chrome window. It's actually taking a while, so just trust me. But basically, what I wanted to say is that the expectation is that if I change, let's say I change the stroke of my border here in Figma, then I can like sync tokens here. And if specify see that there's a difference, then it's going to be directly sending a PR to my, there we go. Look at this. So this was actually when I just changed, when I just added the measurement. So you can see that, magically 19 minutes ago, it just created a PR to actually add that token that I created inside of Specify. So every time you make a change, every time you change something in your Figma file and you sync it at Specify, then automatically creates a PR for your GitHub repo. And then maybe not obviously for everybody, but it means that you still need to approve it to actually include it in your repo, which I think is probably something that you want to do all the time. Cool. Anything else? Any question?
Not a question, just an observation.
Yeah.
It seems like this tool is definitely geared towards Figma as a source of truth, given that you can go from Figma to GitHub, but you can't go from GitHub to Figma, which I think is interesting, at least not right now.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. And so for now, it's a one-way street, basically. I think it goes that way. But yeah, so there's to me, there's multiple things behind that. One, as far as, I don't know any design system team that is not using Figma right now, but I'm sure there are others. So, it's I get it. Figma is probably the thing that most people use right now, but it's also Figma only for the moment. And also, I'm always wondering what's going to happen when Figma is releasing their token management, and I feel like Specify is part of the W3C tokens group that Kelly leads with Gina. So I'm guessing that they would know what to do with that. But at the same time, I just feel like, as a user, I don't want, suddenly using a tool that is not working anymore or something like that. So that's kind of how I felt about it. And philosophically, I want to say that personally, I feel like code is the source of truth, not Figma. So having it as a source, I understand why it makes perfect sense, because usually your designers are going to create stuff in Figma, and then you need to scrap those values and put it into code. So perfectly makes sense. But philosophically, I'm like, eh. So anyway, so that was Specify. The last thing that I want to say is that, again, I just scraped the surface, but there's a REST API, there's a CLI that I didn't talk about. So there's more to it, and potentially you can customize it to whatever you want using probably the REST API. And I think it's probably what most people for now would use it. I think the GitHub app. I'm having trouble here. Is nice to have, and it's nice to have a little first step into it. But yeah, down the line, I feel like you probably want to invest more time in the REST API to do exactly what you want in the way you want it. Good for everybody?
Yeah, so to Donnie's point, right? The code is the source of truth for a lot of people. It is for me. So even though we have our Figma libraries, it's still kind of separate from our code. I'm wondering could this tool be a target for people who are developers, and then they get handed a Figma file and be like, oh, this is a quick way to get that juicy stuff out of there, instead of being inspecting each frame and each element kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe, but at the same time, then you would be using it once, or once in a blue moon. So I don't know. I mean, to me, I mean, it depends on your context and everything, and how often you need to change your tokens. But yeah.
yeah, I expect like there'll be like a back and forth between source and destination, but it's like you said, like it seems this tool is very driven from that design tool flow.
Yep.
And then like
Agreed.
how often do designers be like, hey, I'm gonna put out all these tokens for you?
Yep. I agree.
Yeah, I think that I've seen a lot of tools that like to focus on the Figma like part of it and send resources and assets and things like that out from Figma to places. And I always thought that was backwards. Like, and this has been happening for a long time. And I know we're going to be talking about Backlight soon, which I personally think they're doing it right. I'm going to be biased. But yeah, I've the Figma token stuff and a lot of the Figma plugins. A lot of it is exporting out of Figma, and I don't think there's a lot that's bringing stuff back into Figma. And I think I think that's the right direction. From my perspective.
Makes sense. Well, since you talked about it, Kelly, do you want to present?
Yeah.
Backlight?
So the interesting thing is that we've shown, like you were saying, how to bring tokens from Figma to code. And what Backlight does is that it allows you to do things the other way. And it's a little bit manual. I'm going to show you what I've got. So before we start, full disclosure, I'm an investor and an advisor for Backlight for the team over there. So I'm obviously biased.
Wait. I wanted to show you something funny that I saw. Wait. Just give me a minute. I just want to share before you start. I wanted to.
Show's off the rails.
I
The
know
show is way off the rails now. That's it.
Yeah.
Everyone's watching the news.
I just remembered. Wait. So I'm on the Notion page of Specify, right? And there's credits here. And inside of credits, there's like, create high quality content will not be possible with previous work of our peers. Here we are to thank them. And look at that. Our inspiration, Danny Banks, Donna, Gina, Kelly, Kellig. I feel like there's a lot of design system social clubbers here. So I was like, okay, I guess we're all in good company there. So I just wanted to show you that. I thought
Awesome.
it was funny.
Good catch.
Yep.
All right, so let me share my screen and show you first what I'm doing with Backlight. So can I share just a window? So I'm going to share my Figma window first. So I'm redoing my website right now, and the thing I'm going to show you is how I'm using Backlight to build a button component right now. And if you've used something like Storybook, you will understand what Backlight is very quickly. But essentially, it allows me to build a component library, and you can go further and build an entire design system with documentation, tokens, components, not just the components. But in my case, I want to build the React components that are gonna be these particular buttons. So let me stop sharing and go directly to Backlight and show you what it looks like. Okay. Cool. Okay, so if you remember what I had in Figma, it looked like this. And right now I'm focusing on just building the this initial state of the button, what is called the filled button. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit big. Let me see if I can zoom in the entire window, or maybe I can reduce the size because I want people to be able to follow. Yeah. Okay. So on the right-hand side, I'm showing the Figma file directly in Backlight. But yeah, so here's what Backlight is showing me right now. I've created a design system in Backlight. I created an account, created a design system, and then I created various components. So here on the left-hand side, you can see I've got a few packages, which is my components, button, contact link, divider, footer, etc. I'm going to focus mostly on button. And if you're If you have a keen eye, you will see that there's a design tokens folder and a styles folder. We're going to look at this a bit later. But for now, I can show you that my button is a button React file, some tokens to define the background color and the color of the button. And then in my module.css file, I have some custom properties. And so in that case, the button color is coming from directly that JSON file, which is button color. And so these JSON files get automatically compiled using Style Dictionary, which Danny Banks is one of the main contributors to. And then they get transpiled into CSS variables, and I can use them directly in my components. What else? Yeah, and so I've got a few stories. If you've used Storybook, you will understand what this means. But essentially, what it allows me to do is showcase various states and various parts of the component directly like this. What I kind of like about Backlight is that it allows me to, and I think Storybook can probably do this, but in this case, I can look at my component in all of its variants. And then I can also click that little button here, and I can see it in all the variants. So here, I don't have many breakpoints in this component, but you can see how just having all of the breakpoints for a specific component available and visible like this is kind of neat. Yeah, okay. So once I have those components, if I was in a bigger team, what's interesting is that I can share a link to the current state of my components. It kind of works like Git as well, where you can version your components, you can create branches, and you can share work in progress with your design team, which is pretty cool. And in that case, what I wanted to show you a little bit deeper is how my color token library works. So I've got these color, beige, 100, charcoal 100, etc., etc. I can use my component token JSON files to reference these colors. In this case, the background color of my button is beige. So I'm referencing the button background color to that particular alias, which then is going to resolve into the right beige color in the compiled CSS. And I wanted to show you that if I go into my styles directory, which is where all of my tokens are generated, like it says here at the top of the file, by Style Dictionary, I can see all of my colors, both my global colors, but also my component-specific tokens, such as background, button background color, and button color. And then if I go to so I configured it to also output something, a specific format that Figma tokens is gonna understand. And so the Figma tokens Figma plugin is going to be able to consume those through my GitHub repo. And what is essentially going on here is that I connected this design system to my GitHub repo, which then in Figma, and I wonder if maybe I can just go to Figma like this.
Oh, that's a good call. I was not that smart. I should have done that.
I don't know if the plugins are going to work, to be honest. So
yeah.
let's put that to the test. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't think it works. It won't
no.
work the way you expect it to if you're usually working in the app, I think. At least, I just tested it too.
Oh, no. Okay. You know what? Let me go back to sharing the Figma tokens.
While you do that, Kelly, I have a question. The tokens setup, you have like global tokens and component tokens and things like that. Is that specific to Style Dictionary or Backlight, or is that custom? How is that set up?
It is specific to Style Dictionary. So what I wanted to do is have global tokens which is the kind of a very basic setup. And then I wanted to have JSON files at the root of every single component where I could put my component specific tokens. And yeah, you can do that pretty easily with Style Dictionary by telling it this is where all my token files are going to be, and then compile them to one single file down the road.
Cool.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So let me go to the Figma tokens. Yeah. So if you've never seen the Figma tokens plugin, I just discovered it. I mean, I've been knowing about it for a while, but I only tested it today. And I wanted to bring the tokens back from the source of truth, which is code, back into Figma. And I'm still trying to understand how everything works. But there's a converter that I set up that the Backlight folks have created that allows to bring all these JSON files into one single JSON file that Figma tokens is going to understand. And you can set up some synchronization through GitHub. And the way I set it up is that I pointed it exactly to the right directory and the right file in my repo. And then I think you've got this pull from GitHub button, and it pulls all your tokens and then asks you which ones you want to include. There's a few things that are not super smart yet. Like it doesn't resolve the aliases. So it's not great. So I need to figure out how to do that. And also it doesn't resolve colors properly just yet. So we've got to work on the integration there. But essentially it found that the beige is this RGBA value, charcoal, black, etc. And it doesn't seem to work very well with the RGBA right now. So maybe there's some sort of transformation step that needs to happen. But this is exactly why the W3C design tokens community group is working on standardizing those things so that then you can import, export between tools way more easily than what's happening right now. Instead of having to fiddle around with transformers and configuration.
The other thing,
yeah.
Sorry, Kelly. The other thing that I was thinking about when you were like trying to figure this out is like my question was like in the context of a team and like a big team, if all of like, do you have to like set this plugin on every like for everybody, or can you do it as a like for the entire team? Because I feel like there's a lot of configuration going on to make it work properly.
So my understanding is that see, there's a push to GitHub button here, and there's a pull from GitHub button here. So my understanding is that if you set this up properly, you have a two-way relationship between your GitHub repo and Figma.
Yeah.
I haven't set it properly, so I don't know how well it would work in a team context, and if it would literally push to your main branch, or if it would create a pull request, like Specify creates pull requests, for example.
Yep.
So I don't really know how well that would work in a bigger team context. But what I know is that once you have it imported in Figma tokens, you can create. I think there's like a thing that generates a style guide for you, generates the styles in Figma. So you get a lot of cool stuff for free. And do you have to apply it to every single file? I don't know. Maybe you can do a shared library. And I think this is what I would probably do.
I can kind of speak to this a little bit.
Oh, yes, please.
So the plugin, I think it sort of like lives with this file, this particular file. So if anybody opens this file, they should still, if they open the plugin, they'll see all of the data inside of it. But if you open the sync settings, I think maybe it's under sync and GitHub. So if you click edit on your GitHub, all of this will still persist except for that personal access token, which is like a private token to you, the individual. So I think that is kind of a limitation for a team to all access this. They would all have to go create their own personal access token and then put it in. But I think they could still all be like pushing and pulling to the same repo. So it's still pretty simple.
Okay, so creating an access token is
Not so
Uh,
simple.
Well, yeah, and also it opens. I mean, some security folks might be like, "What?
Yeah.
What? Why would I do that?" But to share it across various other files and across entire teams, then you would probably go to the library, like assets, libraries, and then publish it as a team library. I think this is what I would probably do.
So when you publish a library, I think it's only talking to styles, like Figma styles,
Yeah.
as those properties. And as we all know, one of the limitations right now with Figma styles is that it doesn't have everything we need to share, like specifically like spacing values and stuff. So you can store spacing tokens inside of this plugin and create design tokens with them, but you can't share them. It's not like there's not a great way to share those kinds of values across teams in Figma right now. I assume that there will be soon, hopefully.
Yeah. And this is why also, if we come back to like the specify example, their way apparently to solve it is to define a way for them to be able to scrap it, right? It's like they want you to do, like your depth, your shadow, your, like all those things that are not necessarily like super well implemented in Figma as styles. Like they have a way for, they want you to format your stuff so that they can find it. So, but I totally agree with you. Like this is one of the shortcomings of Figma at this point.
Yeah.
I have a question about the Figma tokens, and again, I'm just like diving into it. Katie, you might know an answer. So in this one, the Figma plugin was like getting the styles, and it's based on that one file. But in our use, I actually have our libraries split into like a color file, a typography file, a spacing file. And so like I would have to have each one have their own thing and then have like, I guess the consolidated library pull those in, or is it now the consolidated library has to be its own set of tokens?
Maybe I can talk to that because my setup did that. It wasn't clear, but my setup, what it did is it had I have multiple files for tokens, and then they're all compiled into one by style dictionary. That then is a Figma tokens compatible file, JSON file. So it doesn't matter if you have a lot of files. They all can get compiled to one that then gets imported into Figma.
But it does have to be right now. The plugin expects one file.
Yeah,
so you have to transform it to do that.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of a limitation in a way, because I think a lot of people organize their tokens by file structure. At least I think that's a nice way, like
I'll have
perspective.
Yeah. I'll have all my files, put it into the JSON, and then have the JSON spit it back out to our users.
I mean, it might also be really helpful in terms of separating things in a plugin scenario is like, I only want to pull in color and topography tokens. Maybe I don't want to pull in elevation tokens because it's RGBA and then it's not going to render properly. So I'm going to leave that alone for right now, or it's not ready for it or whatever. So you can go ahead and like pick and choose what tokens actually come in. Like, I mean, there's pros and cons to that because, the con is maybe there are tokens that you're supposed to be using, but you're not using them and you'll forget to wire it up in your artboard potentially. But I could definitely see some use of like, turning on and off potentially.
Yeah, you can do that programmatically, either in your style dictionary config or directly in the Figma tokens file. You can decide which sets, I think they call it, token sets you want to import or leave alone. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely, there's a few steps involved. What I like about Backlight is that it when you save your JSON files, it automatically refreshes your component preview with the new the new styles, and all the token files for Figma, for example, get regenerated. And then if you want, you can also use Backlight to publish to NPM. And then once it's on NPM, you can tell people to point to that URL to get the latest tokens.
I have a question about.
Somebody's saying that we can use Figma tokens plugin with multiple files. Oh, I didn't know that.
Really? Okay, that wasn't my understanding of it, but that's great. That's exciting. Can I ask a quick question about Backlight? Was it like, how did you feel working in it? is it weird to write code in there? Like, I don't know. I'm so comfortable in like VS Code, and like I have my whole setup, and I would be a little hesitant to have to like write code, I guess, in a different tool because I'm so comfortable. But I'm curious like how that was for you.
Yeah. So they use Monaco which is the engine that is powering VS Code. So a lot of what you are accustomed to would work exactly the same. Now there's a few extensions that you might have in your VS Code that won't be supported there. But because it's connected to GitHub, you can go back and forth. Like if there's anything that you need to do, like that's super advanced and like some sort of search and replace or some file operations and all that, you can go back to VS Code. In fact, I've been using GitHub Codespaces, Storybook, Backlight, and Next.js, and Docker and dev containers, etc., all interchangeably depending on what task I'm doing. So if I'm working just on components and I need to share with somebody really quickly, Backlight is awesome. But as soon as I'm starting to want to look at when I'm changing the components, what impact it has on my app, on like my homepage, it breaks down a little bit. And there is a CLI tool that allows you to do some sort of NPM link between Backlight and your local and all that. I haven't tested it, but you're not locked into the tool, which is kind of what I really like about this. All of their configs are like, they support Storybook configs, style dictionary default configs. They don't get out of they don't trick you into using their proprietary stuff. You can use whatever you want, and it's pretty cool.
Cool. It sounds to me like so far I feel like Specify is more like coming up from the designer side and then getting into the like code, but I feel like Backlight is actually more on the developer side and being able to push stuff to Figma on the opposite. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very much dev first.
Yeah, interesting. Well, the last tool that we're gonna talk about today is Supernova, and I think it's interesting because it has like similar things and also like certain things that are I think different from the others. But this is the website. But I'm just going to jump in to the UI itself. So it's based on exactly the same Figma file that I used before. What is interesting here is that one thing that you're going to see is that like you have tokens, components. It's also cloud-based. So like I already like put all my assets. So I don't know why this one particularly is considered as an asset and the other ones are components. I'm not sure what is the difference. Resources I don't have access to because it's a free plan. Figma is basically where I will find like my one file that I uploaded. Cool. And then like different tokens. So you have colors, typography, fonts. That's interesting because like it wants me apparently to like add a Figma file for my font, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Gradients, shadows, but then if you go to blurs, the space is empty, but this token type cannot be imported, so it must be created in Supernova. So I think it's interesting how like their take is basically like either it's something that is kind of like provided by Figma with like Figma style or something like that, or you create it yourself. And then you get to, like give it a name, a description, a value. You can create an alias, what kind of blur apparently it is, and then the width, custom properties, and then it's basically a UI to create token values. I think it's interesting. It's in a different take, but I wanted to show you that. Like okay, so I created this border, for example. I created manually, so you can specify a color and whatever, width, position, and everything. Cool. You have radius, measure, string, other. You can basically do whatever you want. That's up until now, this is like pretty similar. But what I think is very interesting is that notice this thing on the left, like the first one is content, the second one is documentation, and the third one is code integration. And I want to dig in a little bit into documentation because it really feels like this is kind of what like I'm guessing that we're all familiar with this, but it looks a lot like Zero Height in many ways, because it basically make you able to use like your like how to create like some kind of documentation website for your web, and basically it's very easy for me then to add not Figma, like Figma components directly here, but it's actually coming from my tokens that I already created. So this might not be like the best example. Let me just look at colors. Okay, so here, for example, you see all those things, but it's really like, like block oriented. So you can use like, I want to add, like token lists, token detail, or token group. So let's say token list. And then, you're like specifying, yeah, I want a color. And then I have all my colors that were coming up from, from my tokens, and then you can add them there. So it's basically, an experience that is very similar to what I would, do in Zero Height, for example. And then obviously you can publish and you can view. So here's my beautiful new documentation website, right? Where I have like everything that I wanted. So feels like Supernova, I think to me, like has that particular like plus that I think like they apparently spend a lot of time on that particular space to add the documentation site to what you're doing with your tokens, which I think can make sense, at least for certain teams. And then, like obviously, like how much exactly can you change about it? Like it has exactly the same constraint that Zero Height to me also in my book is that, well, the style, you cannot really, like change too much about it, or you cannot use your own components and stuff like that. But, it's like, your settings, you do have analytics, look and feel, like you can customize it here and there, but it's basically, they're all going to look the same. And then talking about code integration, it's a different experience, because you have builds. So that's every time I build something, you have, like the log here. And then, so those are the exporters that I installed already. So you see that I installed like the CSS one and the style dictionary one. And also, I mean, the free plan only has one hook, but that's basically how you can automate, like make it automatic that every time you change something, it actually will export code and create a pull request in my GitHub repo. So same idea, right? It's like here we are in my GitHub with my, Supernova test repo. And if I look at colors, they're basically like exported as custom properties. So that would, something that you would be expecting. Let me try to find where are the other. Okay, so I don't know if, yeah, I only have one hook, so I can like remove this one if I want to create a new one. But yeah, I have a name every time, like it's either like new version, the head changed, or the source is updated. So if you want when Figma library is published, or if like every time anything changes in your design system, or when you have a new version released. And then after that, you can like, this is the exporter that I installed. And then after that, you have like different brands if you want. I'm trying to find where do I download like the other exporter. I cannot find it now. If somebody sees it, let me know. Oh, I guess store. So stupid. Okay, so store, you have like exporter for Android, CSS, documentation. Okay, Flutter, iOS, LESS, PDF, PNG, React, React Native, SCSS, Style Dictionary, SVG, Tailwind. And so you can, preview, install, and see what, like what you like. I'm guessing you can create your own too, but I obviously, oh, wow. Create a new exporter from a GitHub repo. Okay. So you can create your own. Cool. Any question?
No, I think the one thing that could be really beneficial for people is, like, again, the documentation is part of this, and you can enable designers or people who are not coding to kind of update documentation and like create pages that are not like just the token specific type stuff. So I think that's like one of the benefits of this, because like right now, either for our documentation site, we have to edit like the MDX in GitHub, and then how many designers are going to go in there and edit that kind of thing.
It's funny you mentioned that, Donna, because actually, is it possible that I could share quickly?
Yeah.
There's a plugin that that I found through the Design System workspace that, let's see if I could share. Don't you list it again? I want the Chrome tab. That is this one. Yeah, so this thing is called Gist. It's a plugin for Figma.
Hey, I can't see it. I don't know
You
if
can't see it?
I'm the only one.
well,
I can see it now.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, it's a plugin for Figma, and the idea behind this plugin is that you could type your docs in Figma, and it then be saved. Now, what he's currently doing is they're being saved only in Figma, and they would be pulled up in other Figma files. But in speaking with him, he kind of also, I guess, had the idea as well, that it would be a lot more helpful to actually get these docs out and into, some sort of, CMS or just documentation site just in general. So he's working on that. He's working on trying to get, his name is Mike, working on getting it to GitHub, for example, for like version control and stuff. But I always thought, like as a developer, we write our docs in Markdown in the code editor right there alongside the code. For designers, they are making an artboard, and then they have to take their docs and write somewhere else, like in Zero Height or Supernova or whatever content management system that they're in, and they're out of the context of their design application. And I always thought that was ridiculous. Like, why can't the designers write the documentation alongside the artboard? And this is, I think, what this thing is going to be doing. So if you go to the Figma plugin, there's like more information about what he's planning on it. But I think this is the right direction for like the documentation stuff from the designer side. I think it's going to be really, really great.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out, because you're right. Like literally in our in our community meeting this week, that was one of the things. Is like they really liked in Sketch, because when you pull up the component, it has all the description and that kind of stuff. That's where we put our documentation, how to use it. And in Figma, it's like, oh, I didn't know how to use that. I didn't know that there's toggles I can use. It's just they're just busy pulling in and copying kind of stuff, so they don't see that in context. So that's pretty cool. I'll check that out.
Fun. Well, I think we're pretty much at time, so it's actually pretty well thought. I mean, it was a nappy accident. Let's just put it this way. Overall, and just to wrap it up, I feel like I'm pretty excited about all those tools, because ultimately I think that they're all trying to solve like pain points that we all have from one point to another. So I think I'm excited to see what's coming up. I again want to thank all of those companies and builders to create tools for us to like simplify our lives. And I think it's great that there's like different views and different ways to try to solve it. And I think that pretty much everything that we saw had like pros and cons and like really good ideas and also space for improvement. That's normal. That's all of those things are new tools. I will personally like, keep an eye on everything. But yeah, I was generally, I like all those things. I will keep an eye on for sure. Anybody else wanted to, I don't know, add something to that?
I just want to shout out that all this stuff is like web apps. It's like crazy how far we've come to like having to install an application. I remember like having to like install like, you know, things to work with fonts and stuff like that, and like have to install it on your OS. And the fact that we can do all of this just from a web browser is crazy. You know, so kudos on all of us developers.
+1 to that. Thank you very much, Danny. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for being with me today. I think that's a wrap. So, you know, as usual, stay fresh, cheese bags.